I'll pump you until your legs shake, Giant Cowboy promised the virgin male order bride. She had grown up helping her mother with household chores and her father in the small garden behind their house. Her world was simple, predictable, and sometimes lonely. From a young age, Clara had known that she was different from other girls in her town. While many of them dreamed about young men coming to sweep them off their feet, Clara's dreams were quieter. She longed for stability, for a life where she would not always worry about money or safety. She wanted a place to call home and someone who would respect her, someone who would care for her in small but meaningful ways. Her family was not wealthy. Her father worked as a carpenter, taking small jobs wherever he could, and her mother cleaned houses to earn a little extra money. They had just enough to survive, but not much more. Clara had always been responsible, careful with money, and aware of the smallest risks. She had learned to see the world clearly, without illusions, and she knew that life did not always offer happiness the way stories did in books. Even so, she hoped, quietly, for a change, for something different to happen that would take her out of the small town that felt like both home and prison. One evening, as the sun was setting, casting golden light over the rooftops, Clara sat in the little kitchen with her mother. They were peeling potatoes together, the air thick with the smell of earth and soap. Her mother paused, looking at her with tired eyes, and said, "Clara, I think it's time we consider the offer." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She knew exactly what her mother meant. A letter had arrived a few days ago from a man who lived far away in another state. He was a cowboy, a man who owned a large ranch, and he was looking for a bride through letters. The idea of becoming a mail-order bride was strange to Clara. She had read about it in old newspapers and stories her grandmother told her. But seeing the letter in her hands, thinking about the man who had written it, made her feel a mixture of fear, curiosity, and strange hope. Her mother spoke softly. "He seems like a good man. He can offer stability, a home, and work. You will not be alone anymore. You will have a family of your own." Clara looked down at her hands. She had imagined many futures for herself, but never one like this. Marrying a man she had never met, traveling to a place she did not know, leaving behind the only life she had ever known. It was terrifying. Yet there was a part of her that felt excitement. Perhaps this was the change she had been waiting for, the chance to build a life that was her own. Over the next few days, Clara tried to imagine what life would be like on the ranch. She pictured wide fields stretching out under the sky, cows grazing, barns full of hay, and a large house that smelled of wood and leather. She imagined meeting a man who was strong and serious, whose life was filled with work and discipline. The thought made her heart race. She wondered what kind of person he was. Was he kind? Was he fair? Would he understand her quiet nature, her careful ways? She could not know. And yet she felt a small, stubborn hope growing inside her, a hope that perhaps this life could bring her more than just stability. Perhaps it could bring her respect, kindness, and a sense of belonging. The journey itself was the first real test of her courage. Clara had never traveled far from her town. The train ride alone took several days, and each passing mile made her more aware of how much she was leaving behind. The familiar faces, the streets she had walked 100 times, the small garden where she had played as a child, all were slowly disappearing. She felt a mix of excitement and fear. Every night on the train, she wrote letters she would never send, imagining conversations with the man she was about to meet. She told herself to be brave, to hold her head high, and to trust that this choice, though frightening, might lead to something better. When Clara finally arrived in the town near the ranch, she felt both nervous and curious. The air smelled different, fresher, with the scent of fields and animals. The streets were wider, and the houses looked larger than those in her hometown. People moved quickly, and there was a sense of energy and life that she had never experienced before. Yet, the closer she got to the ranch, the more her heart pounded. What if the man was nothing like she imagined? What if the life she hoped for did not exist? These thoughts haunted her as she walked the path toward the ranch gate, her small suitcase in hand. The first time Clara saw Ethan, her heart skipped a beat. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a quiet strength in his movements. His eyes were serious, but not unkind. He looked at her with careful curiosity, trying to understand who she was, what she expected, and what kind of life she wanted to build. Ethan had his own burdens. He had lived on the ranch his entire life, working from dawn to dusk, building a life filled with hard work, solitude, and responsibility. He had written to Clara not out of whim, but because he felt the weight of loneliness and the hope of having someone who could be part of his life in a meaningful way. Both of them, strangers from very different worlds, felt the gravity of the moment. Their first conversation was simple, polite, and full of pauses. Clara struggled to find the right words, and Ethan listened quietly, trying to measure her personality, her hopes, and her fears. Neither knew exactly how to begin a marriage that had started with letters and promises rather than love and shared experiences. Both were aware of the pressure, the expectations, and the unknown challenges that lay ahead. But there was a sense of possibility, a feeling that perhaps together they could build something real, something meaningful. As the evening settled over the ranch, Clara walked around the property, exploring quietly. She noticed the animals, the barns, and the fields. She felt the strength of the land, the history embedded in the fences and the soil. For the first time in her life, she sensed a connection to a place that could be hers to care for, to nurture, and to call home. It was a place that required hard work, patience, and courage, the very qualities she had learned in her own small life, working alongside her family. That night, as Clara prepared for bed in a room that felt foreign yet promising, she reflected on the choices she had made. She was scared, yes, but she was also proud of herself for taking a chance. She knew that life would not be easy. There would be struggles, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt, but she also knew that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. And somewhere in the quiet of the ranch under the stars, she felt the first stirrings of hope, the belief that perhaps this new life, this new beginning, could bring her more than she had ever dreamed of. Clara closed her eyes, listening to the sounds of the ranch. The lowing of cows, the creak of the barn, the whisper of wind through the fields. She thought about the letters she had written, the promises she had made to herself, and the life she was about to begin. Though the road ahead was uncertain, she felt a quiet determination. She was no longer just a girl from a small town. She was a woman stepping into a world full of possibility, strength, and the chance to find her place, her voice, and her own kind of happiness. Clara had arrived at the ranch with a mixture of excitement and fear, and now the reality of living there began to settle in. The sun had risen over the wide fields, casting golden light on the barns, fences, and grazing animals. It was beautiful in a way she had never imagined, but the beauty also made her feel small. Everything seemed so large and powerful, the land, the animals, and especially Ethan. Ethan was a man of few words. His height and broad shoulders made him seem almost like a mountain in human form. He moved carefully, always alert, and every action he took showed his strength and experience. Clara noticed the way he handled the horses, how his hands could control something as large and unpredictable as a stallion with patience and calm. At first, she felt intimidated. She had never been around so many animals, let alone such a vast property. The barn smelled of hay and horses, and the animals moved freely, but each seemed to know its place, guided by Ethan's steady hand. The first morning was the hardest. Clara woke early, as she always had, but here she was expected to help with chores she had never done before. She fed the chickens under Ethan's watchful eye and collected eggs, feeling clumsy and unsure. She tried to hide her mistakes, but Ethan noticed everything. However, he did not scold her. Instead, he corrected her gently, showing her the right way to lift a bale of hay or how to move quietly around the animals. Clara felt a strange mixture of relief and pressure. Relief because he was patient, and pressure because she wanted to prove herself, to show that she belonged. Breakfast that morning was quiet. Clara prepared simple eggs and bread while Ethan poured coffee and ate slowly, keeping his eyes on her but not saying much. The silence between them was heavy at times, but it was also a form of communication. Clara learned to watch his expressions, the way he nodded or frowned, and she started to understand him a little without words. She realized that Ethan had lived alone for a long time and that this ranch was his life. Everything he did was connected to maintaining the land, the animals, and the home he had built with his own hands. Over the next few days, Clara tried to adjust to the rhythm of ranch life. It was exhausting. Her hands became sore from chores, and her muscles ached from work she had never done before. Yet she felt proud every evening when she saw the results of her labor, the neatly stacked hay, the clean stalls, the animals fed and calm. Slowly she began to see herself not just as a visitor or a stranger, but as someone who belonged in this world, someone who could contribute. Ethan noticed her effort. At first he was distant, as he always was, but he started to speak more often, giving small instructions and offering advice. He taught her how to ride a horse properly, how to mend fences, and how to anticipate the needs of the animals. He did not praise her often, but there were small signs of approval, a nod, a slight smile, a quiet good job when she did something correctly. Clara treasured these moments, feeling a connection slowly growing between them. Despite these small bonds, misunderstandings were common. Clara sometimes misread Ethan's quiet nature as anger or disinterest. She felt lonely in the evenings when he returned late from work or when he spent hours fixing something on the ranch without speaking. She began to write letters in her journal, documenting her fears and hopes, trying to make sense of her feelings. Writing helped her process her emotions and reminded her that she was learning, growing, and adjusting to a life so different from her old town. One afternoon, a storm rolled in over the ranch. Dark clouds filled the sky, and heavy rain began to fall, turning the dirt paths into slippery mud. Clara was feeding the animals when a loud crack of thunder startled the horses, and one of them bolted. Clara froze, unsure what to do. She panicked for a moment, but then she saw Ethan running toward her with calm, determined steps. He reached the horse before it could escape the fenced area and with careful movements calmed it down. Clara watched, awestruck. She realized in that moment how much skill, patience, and courage Ethan had. It was not just his size or strength, but his careful attention, his experience, and his steady heart that commanded respect. After the storm passed, Clara helped Ethan repair minor damages around the ranch. They worked together silently, hands busy with tasks, side by side. In that shared effort, a subtle bond began to form. She realized that while they were different, they could rely on each other. She also realized that Ethan's quietness was not coldness. It was focus, thoughtfulness, and a way of life shaped by years of responsibility. Evenings were a time of reflection. Clara would sit by the window, looking out at the stars, thinking about her family and the life she had left behind. She missed her mother's voice, her father's guidance, and the small comforts of her hometown. Yet she also felt a strange pride. She was facing challenges head-on, learning new skills, and slowly becoming part of a world that had seemed intimidating at first. Every day, she grew a little stronger, more confident, and more certain that she could handle whatever life on the ranch threw at her. Ethan, too, began to notice changes in himself. He saw Clara's resilience, her willingness to learn, and her quiet courage. He had expected a young bride to arrive and fit into his life easily, but Clara was not that. She challenged him in subtle ways, asking questions, offering ideas, and making small improvements to the household routines. At first, he resisted these changes, unsure how to react. but gradually he appreciated her perspective. Her presence brought life and warmth into the ranch house, a welcome contrast to the empty walls he had lived with for so long. As days turned into weeks, Clara and Ethan developed a rhythm. They learned to communicate without words, to anticipate each other's needs, and to respect the boundaries that each required. Clara felt less afraid, and Ethan felt a cautious hope. They began to share small stories about their pasts, their families, and their dreams. These stories were not long or dramatic, but they were meaningful. They revealed pieces of themselves to each other, creating a foundation of trust and understanding that neither had expected when the marriage began with letters and promises. Despite the growing connection, challenges remained. Clara struggled with homesickness, with the physical demands of ranch life, and with understanding Ethan's complex personality. Ethan struggled with patience, with expressing his feelings, and with balancing his expectations with Clara's needs. Misunderstandings happened, words were sometimes left unsaid, and moments of frustration arose. Yet each difficulty was met with effort, and slowly, each challenge became an opportunity for growth. By the end of the first month, Clara began to see the ranch not as a place of fear and uncertainty, but as a home where she could belong. She could imagine herself planting a garden, caring for the animals, and building a life alongside Ethan. She realized that the initial fear she had felt upon arriving was natural, but it was also temporary. The hard work, the shared efforts, and the small victories were slowly creating a life filled with purpose and potential. Ethan, too, began to feel a sense of relief and possibility. He realized that Clara was not just a bride who had come to fulfill a promise. She was a partner, someone who could share in the responsibilities, joys, and challenges of ranch life. He began to imagine a future where they could work together, not just coexist, but truly live and build a home together. Clara understood that their relationship would take time to develop fully. Trust, respect, and connection could not be rushed. Yet, for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope that she had not felt before, a hope that this new chapter in her life could become something meaningful, fulfilling, and perhaps even joyful. As night fell and the ranch was quiet once more, Clara looked around the room that was now hers, feeling a sense of pride and belonging. She thought about the day's work, the small victories, and the lessons learned. She realized that every challenge she faced was shaping her, making her stronger and more confident. And for the first time since leaving her hometown, she felt the possibility of happiness, not the loud, dramatic happiness of fairy tales, but a quiet, steady, and lasting kind of happiness that comes from courage, effort, and connection. Life on the ranch had settled into rhythm, though it was not without its challenges. Clara had grown more confident in her daily tasks, and Ethan had begun to appreciate her presence more than he had expected. Each day brought new lessons, small victories, and moments that slowly built respect between them. Life was not easy, but it was beginning to feel meaningful, like they were both part of something larger than themselves. Clara woke each morning with a sense of purpose. She had learned to wake before sunrise, preparing breakfast and helping with chores even before Ethan stepped outside. The chickens, cows, and horses no longer intimidated her. She had learned the rhythm of the ranch, understanding which animals needed attention first, how to move quietly through the barns, and how to handle the small emergencies that often arose. Her hands were roughened from work and her muscles ached at night, but she felt stronger with each passing day. There was pride in her work, and Ethan noticed it. He saw the way she carefully tended to the animals, how she took initiative, and how she did not give up when things became difficult. One morning, Clara was out in the fields, carrying water to the horses, when she noticed a young foal struggling to stand. Its legs were shaky and it looked frightened. Without thinking, Clara ran to help, lifting the foal gently and speaking to it in a soft voice. She could hear Ethan approaching from behind. "You're good with them," he said quietly, watching her. Clara felt a small flush of pride but kept her attention on the foal. With careful guidance from Ethan, she helped the young horse find its footing. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental to her. Ethan's nod of approval made her heart lift. She felt that she was finally contributing something important to the ranch. Ethan, for his part, was learning as well. He had always been used to working alone, relying on his own strength and knowledge. But now, with Clara by his side, he realized that partnership could make life richer. He noticed her carefulness, her empathy, and her willingness to learn. Slowly, he began to open up in small ways, teaching her how to mend fences efficiently, how to recognize when an animal was sick or tired, and how to handle the unpredictability of ranch life. These lessons were more than practical. They were opportunities for connection. Every time Clara asked a question or tried something new, Ethan saw a glimpse of determination and courage that impressed him deeply. The work was not always easy, and misunderstandings were common. Clara often struggled to keep up with the pace, and Ethan's expectations were high. There were moments when frustration bubbled to the surface. Clara sometimes wished Ethan would be gentler, while Ethan sometimes wished Clara would understand the routines without needing constant guidance. Yet, even in these moments, there was a growing understanding. They began to see each other's strengths and weaknesses, learning to adapt and support one another. The challenges of ranch life became a way for them to connect, rather than push them apart. One afternoon, a sudden fire broke out in one of the smaller fields. A spark from a dry patch of grass quickly spread, and Clara felt a wave of panic. Horses neighed, and the smoke made her cough. Ethan acted quickly, calling her to follow his instructions without hesitation. Together, they worked to move the animals to safety and control the spread of the fire. Clara was terrified, but she trusted Ethan's guidance. By the time the fire was contained, both were exhausted, covered in ash and sweat. But there was a sense of triumph and teamwork that neither had experienced before. In the face of danger, they had relied on each other, and the experience forged a bond of trust that went deeper than words. Even outside of emergencies, the small acts of daily life brought them closer. Clara began to cook meals that Ethan enjoyed, experimenting with ingredients and techniques that reminded her of home. Ethan, in turn, helped her with tasks she found difficult, offering steady hands and quiet guidance. There were moments of shared laughter when a bucket tipped over or when a stubborn horse refused to cooperate. These small, seemingly insignificant moments were the threads weaving them together. Slowly, Clara began to feel that the house, the ranch, and the land were not just Ethan's domain, but something they were building together. Despite the growing connection, Clara sometimes felt lonely in unexpected ways. The evenings were quiet, and she missed her family. She would sit by the window, watching the sunset, thinking about the life she had left behind. Ethan noticed her reflective mood and in his own quiet way tried to comfort her. He did not offer empty words but simple gestures. A cup of tea, a warm blanket, or a shared smile spoke volumes. Clara realized that his care was not always loud or obvious, but it was steady, consistent, and real. Their conversations, when they happened, became more meaningful. Ethan shared stories of his childhood on the ranch, of challenges he had faced, and of dreams he had long buried. Clara spoke of her family, her hopes, and the life she had imagined for herself. They discovered shared values, hard work, patience, and the desire for a stable, respectful life. These discussions helped them see each other not just as strangers or partners in necessity, but as individuals capable of understanding, empathy, and support. One rainy day, they worked together in the barn, repairing a broken fence. The rain poured down outside, but inside they were focused, moving side by side. Clara noticed the way Ethan's hands worked, strong but careful, and she felt a growing admiration. Ethan noticed how Clara adapted quickly, asking questions, learning from mistakes, and showing initiative. There was a silent acknowledgement between them, a recognition that they were both contributing, learning, and growing together. That day, Clara felt a sense of belonging that she had never known before. She was part of the ranch, part of a team, and in a small, quiet way, part of Ethan's life. Trust began to develop naturally. Clara started to leave tasks for Ethan without fear, knowing he would handle them well. Ethan started to rely on her judgment, allowing her more responsibility in caring for the animals and managing small household tasks. They learned to anticipate each other's needs, communicate through subtle gestures, and respect each other's limits. This trust was not immediate, but it was steady, built over days of effort, mistakes, and shared victories. Despite their growing bond, fear lingered. Clara sometimes wondered if Ethan truly valued her beyond the help she provided. Ethan sometimes worried that Clara might leave, or that she might not be able to handle the challenges of ranch life. These fears were unspoken, but they influenced small interactions, the way he watched her, the way she hesitated before speaking. Slowly, they learned that fear could be transformed into care. By facing difficulties together and supporting each other, they began to see that partnership meant more than just sharing work. It meant sharing life, challenges, and even vulnerabilities. One evening, after a long day of chores, they sat outside watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted with orange, pink, and purple hues, and the fields shimmered in the fading light. Clara felt a sense of peace she had not known before. She realized that she was no longer just a visitor, no longer just a bride who had arrived out of obligation. She was part of something meaningful, part of a life that required effort, patience, and care, but also offered connection and hope. Ethan, watching her quietly, felt the same. He saw the strength in her, the determination, and the quiet courage. He began to understand that this partnership, built slowly and carefully, could be a foundation for something lasting. By the end of the season, Clara and Ethan had faced countless small challenges, emergencies, and successes together. They had learned to rely on each other, to respect each other's abilities, and to find joy in shared moments. What had begun as a practical arrangement was slowly transforming into mutual respect, understanding, and even a kind of quiet affection. They were not yet in love in the way that stories often described, but they were learning the foundation upon which true partnership, and perhaps love, could grow. Clara understood that life on the ranch would continue to be demanding, filled with unexpected obstacles and responsibilities, but she also understood that she was no longer alone. She had someone she could rely on, someone who could guide her, and someone who was beginning to trust her in return. Ethan understood that life with Clara brought more than help with chores. It brought warmth, perspective, and a sense of hope he had not felt in years. Together, they had begun to turn the ranch into a home, a place of safety, effort, and growing connection. And in that quiet, steady way that life often moves, Clara realized that she had begun to belong, not just to the ranch, not just to Ethan, but to a life she was building for herself, a life filled with purpose, trust, and possibility. Each day, each small victory, and each moment of shared effort was a step toward something greater, a partnership built on respect, patience, and the quiet understanding that real connection is earned, not given. Life on the ranch had grown comfortable in its routine, yet with comfort came new challenges, challenges of the heart. Clara and Ethan had learned to work together, to communicate without many words, and to rely on each other in daily life. Yet as their connection deepened, so did the weight of unspoken fears and doubts. Clara found herself thinking more about Ethan, not just as her partner in chores, but as a man with hopes, expectations, and past experiences that shaped who he was. Ethan, too, found his thoughts often wandering to Clara, considering her strength, her resilience, and the quiet ways she touched his life. Both realized that living together had created a bond far stronger than they had expected, but neither knew how to navigate the emotions that were beginning to stir. The first sign of tension came one morning when Clara accidentally left some tools outside, and a sudden rainstorm threatened to ruin them. Ethan had been meticulous about keeping everything in order, and though he did not shout, his quiet frustration was evident. Clara apologized immediately, feeling a flush of guilt. She had never intended to disappoint him, but the small mistake seemed to carry weight far beyond its size. Ethan looked at her carefully, trying to measure his response. He knew he could have handled it differently, but he also recognized that his reaction revealed his fears. He did not want the ranch to fall into disorder, and he feared losing the control he had maintained for so long. This moment marked the beginning of a series of small conflicts. Clara often misread Ethan's quietness as disapproval, while Ethan sometimes misread Clara's independent spirit as defiance. They began to experience the complexities of living closely with someone they respected, but did not fully understand yet. Each day brought moments of warmth, followed by moments of tension. Clara would wonder if she truly belonged, if she was making a positive difference, or if her presence might someday become a burden. Ethan, in turn, questioned whether he could balance his expectations with his growing affection for Clara. One afternoon, while tending to the fields, Clara noticed that Ethan seemed distant. He moved slowly, his usual energy subdued. She hesitated before speaking, unsure if she should ask, but her concern overcame her caution. "Is everything all right?" she asked softly. Ethan paused, looking at the ground before meeting her eyes. "I'm just thinking," he said quietly. Clara sensed there was more he wasn't saying, but she did not push. Instead, she continued working, hoping that her calm presence might offer comfort. That evening, they shared a quiet dinner, each aware of the tension, neither fully understanding the other, yet both feeling it keenly. The emotional distance grew over the next few days. Clara found herself second-guessing her actions, wondering if Ethan truly valued her beyond her ability to help on the ranch. She missed the reassurance that had once been present in small nods and quiet approvals. Ethan, meanwhile, wrestled with his own fear, the fear that showing too much care or affection might make him vulnerable. He had spent years relying on his own strength and solitude, and the idea of opening his heart fully terrified him. Both were caught in a cycle of worry and hesitation, where the desire to connect was blocked by fear of rejection or misunderstanding. A turning point came during an unexpected accident. One of the horses became startled while Clara was brushing it, and in a sudden movement, she fell to the ground. Ethan rushed to her side immediately, his usual calm replaced by concern. He helped her to her feet, checking for injuries, and his hands trembled slightly, a rare display of emotion. Clara, shaken but unharmed, realized that Ethan's concern went far beyond mere responsibility for the ranch. He cared for her well-being in a personal, profound way. In that moment, both understood that their bond was stronger than either had allowed themselves to admit. After the incident, they spent the evening in quiet reflection. Clara sat near the fireplace, her thoughts swirling with gratitude and fear. She realized how much she valued Ethan's guidance and presence, and yet she feared becoming too dependent or expecting more than he could give. Ethan, on the other hand, paced the room, thinking about the depth of his concern for Clara and how much he had grown to rely on her presence. The accident had shaken them, but it also revealed a truth they had not yet acknowledged. Their lives were intertwined in ways that went beyond chores and routine. The next few days brought moments of cautious honesty. Clara began to speak more openly about her fears, explaining that she sometimes felt unsure if she truly belonged on the ranch. Ethan listened, silently at first, then began to open up about his own insecurities, how he feared losing control, how he had lived so long alone that trusting another person felt dangerous, and how he worried that his feelings might overwhelm him. These conversations were uncomfortable at first, filled with pauses, awkward silences, and uncertainty. Yet, they were necessary. Each word spoken chipped away at the wall of fear and misunderstanding that had begun to grow between them. Slowly, they began to understand each other better. Clara realized that Ethan's quiet nature was not a lack of affection, but a way of expressing care and responsibility. Ethan realized that Clara's independence and curiosity were not signs of rebellion, but signs of strength and courage. They started to find ways to support each other emotionally, small gestures that carried deep meaning. A shared smile after a long day, a gentle touch on the shoulder, a quiet word of encouragement. These moments, though small, became the foundation for trust and emotional intimacy. Evenings became opportunities for reflection and connection. They would sit outside under the stars, listening to the quiet of the ranch, speaking in whispers about their dreams, memories, and fears. Clara shared stories from her childhood, the lessons her parents had taught her, and the moments that had shaped her character. Ethan spoke of the ranch, his upbringing, and the loneliness he had experienced before her arrival. They discovered common values: hard work, patience, and the desire to create a life filled with respect and care. These conversations, simple yet profound, helped them see each other not just as partners in work, but as individuals capable of understanding, empathy, and trust. Despite these breakthroughs, moments of doubt still appeared. Clara occasionally wondered if her happiness was real, or if it was merely the relief of finding stability. Ethan sometimes questioned whether he could fully balance his protective nature with his growing emotional attachment. Yet each time they faced a challenge together, whether a difficult day on the ranch, a minor accident, or a miscommunication, they grew stronger as a pair. Fear and hesitation gradually gave way to understanding, and the respect that had been growing over months began to transform into something deeper. A quiet but powerful moment came one evening during a storm. Rain poured over the ranch, lightning illuminated the fields, and wind howled through the barns. Clara and Ethan worked side by side, securing the animals and ensuring that nothing was damaged. The intensity of the storm forced them to rely on each other completely. In the dim light of the barn, as they moved together efficiently and carefully, both felt a sense of unity that had never existed before. They had weathered challenges individually, but together, they realized they were stronger than the sum of their parts. The storm became a metaphor for their relationship, turbulent at times, but survivable through cooperation, trust, and mutual care. By the end of the week, Clara and Ethan had reached a subtle but important turning point. They were no longer strangers or distant partners. They were individuals learning to navigate a shared life, to support one another emotionally as well as practically. Clara understood that trust and connection required patience, courage, and openness. Ethan realized that emotional closeness did not weaken him, but made his life richer and more meaningful. Together, they had begun to redefine their relationship, moving from mere necessity to genuine understanding and care. As night fell and the ranch grew quiet once more, Clara and Ethan sat by the fire, reflecting on the week's events. There were no dramatic declarations, no sudden revelations, but a quiet, steady recognition of something growing between them. Fear had not vanished completely, but it had softened, replaced by respect, trust, and a cautious hope. They had faced challenges, acknowledged insecurities, and discovered that life together, though demanding, could also be filled with connection and quiet joy. Clara realized that she had begun to love the life she was building, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. She valued Ethan not just for his strength, but for his patience, his integrity, and the way he was learning to open his heart. Ethan, in turn, recognized that Clara's presence brought balance to his life, offering warmth, perspective, and a sense of purpose that had long been missing. They had not yet solved all their fears or mastered all their emotions, but they had begun a journey together, a journey of trust, respect, and the gradual discovery of a bond that could grow into something lasting and meaningful. The days on the ranch had passed, each filled with hard work, small victories, and moments that built understanding between Clara and Ethan. Yet the most important growth was not in chores or skills, it was in their hearts. Both had faced their fears, learned to trust each other, and discovered a bond that went deeper than routine or necessity. Now, as the season slowly changed, they began to understand that their relationship had grown into something meaningful, a partnership built on respect, care, and shared life. Clara awoke one morning with a sense of calm determination. She had learned the rhythm of the ranch and the ways of the animals. Her confidence had grown, but more importantly, her understanding of Ethan had deepened. She knew he was not perfect. He was quiet, cautious, and sometimes distant, but she also knew that his actions spoke louder than words. His concern for her well-being, his patience in teaching her the work, and his steady presence were signs of a man who valued more than efficiency. He valued her. Ethan, for his part, had begun to see Clara not just as a capable helper, but as a true partner. Her resilience, empathy, and willingness to face challenges inspired him. He realized that life on the ranch, which had once been solitary and predictable, had become richer because of her presence. Her laughter in the barns, her careful hands tending the animals, and her quiet determination brought warmth into the house and life into his world. He began to understand that true strength was not just physical, it was emotional, built through patience, understanding, and the willingness to trust another person. The morning chores passed as usual, but there was a lightness in the air. Clara and Ethan worked side by side, moving together with a rhythm that had been developed over months. They no longer needed constant instruction or reminders. They anticipated each other's movements, shared silent gestures, and smiled at small successes. There was a comfort in this routine, a shared understanding that had been earned rather than given. It was in these quiet, everyday moments that their bond had grown strongest. Later in the afternoon, Clara took a walk to the edge of the fields, reflecting on how far she had come. She remembered the first days on the ranch, the fear, the loneliness, and the uncertainty. Now she felt a sense of belonging she had never known. She was part of this land, part of this life, and part of Ethan's world. Her fears had not disappeared, but they had been replaced by confidence, trust, and a quiet hope for the future. She realized that happiness was not something sudden or dramatic. It was built through effort, patience, and understanding, and she had found it here, in small but meaningful ways. Ethan joined her at the fence, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He handed one to Clara, their fingers brushing briefly. "It's a good day," he said simply. Clara smiled, understanding more than the words themselves. It was a statement of appreciation, of acknowledgement for all they had done together, and of the quiet joy they found in each other's company. They stood side by side, watching the cattle graze and the wind ripple across the fields. It was in this stillness that they felt a shared sense of purpose, a recognition that they were building something together, not just a life, but a partnership rooted in trust and care. The evening brought a small challenge. A young calf had wandered from the herd, and the sun was dipping low on the horizon. Clara and Ethan worked together to guide it back safely, using their combined knowledge of the animals and the land. The task required patience, communication, and trust. When the calf was finally returned, both sighed in relief and shared a quiet laugh. It was a simple moment, yet it symbolized everything they had learned. That together they could face difficulties, protect what they cared about, and succeed in ways they could not alone. As darkness settled over the ranch, Clara and Ethan returned to the house. The warmth of the fire, the smell of fresh bread, and the quiet creak of the wooden floor made the house feel like home. They shared a meal in companionable silence, speaking only when necessary, yet feeling a profound connection. Clara realized that she no longer needed constant reassurance. She trusted Ethan, and he trusted her. This mutual understanding was a new kind of freedom, a freedom that came from knowing they could rely on each other, no matter what challenges arose. Later that night, Clara found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of the letter she had received months ago, the decision to leave her hometown, and the uncertainty she had felt. She remembered the fear of meeting Ethan, the first days of work on the ranch, and the storms, both literal and emotional, that they had faced together. Each memory was a reminder of how far they had come, and how their bond had grown from necessity into something deeply meaningful. She realized that trust and love were not sudden gifts. They were earned through effort, understanding, and shared experiences. Ethan, in the quiet of his room, had similar thoughts. He had spent years managing the ranch alone, believing that solitude was his only path. Clara's arrival had challenged that belief, bringing new responsibilities, emotions, and perspectives into his life. He had feared the vulnerability that came with caring for someone else, yet he now understood that opening his heart had made him stronger, not weaker. Clara had taught him patience, empathy, and the quiet strength of emotional connection. He felt gratitude for her presence, and a growing determination to honor the partnership they had built. The next morning, Clara and Ethan faced another routine day, yet there was a subtle shift in their interactions. Their communication was smoother, their understanding deeper, and their care for each other more evident. Clara no longer hesitated to ask questions or share her ideas, and Ethan no longer felt the need to control every detail. They had found a balance, a shared rhythm that allowed each to contribute fully while respecting the other's abilities and perspectives. It was a partnership in the truest sense, forged through months of work, patience, and emotional growth. As the sun set on another day, they sat together on the porch, watching the sky change colors and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Clara leaned back, feeling the wind on her face, and realized that she was no longer a visitor in this world. She was part of it. She was part of Ethan's life, part of the ranch, and part of a shared future that held promise and stability. Ethan watched her quietly, recognizing the strength and grace she had brought to his life. He understood that their partnership was now built on a foundation of respect, trust, and shared effort, and that this foundation could support a lasting, meaningful connection. That evening, after completing their chores, they sat by the fireplace, reflecting on the growth they had experienced together. There were no dramatic declarations or sudden confessions, only a quiet acknowledgement of the bond they had formed. They had faced fears, overcome challenges, and learned to trust each other fully. The partnership that began with letters and promises had evolved into a life built on mutual respect, care, and understanding. They had discovered that true connection was not instant, but developed through patience, effort, and the willingness to see each other as equals. Clara realized that the happiness she had sought was not about grand gestures or dramatic events. It was in the shared moments of effort, the quiet victories of daily life, and the steady presence of someone who cared. She understood that love and partnership were about more than words. They were about trust, respect, and commitment. Ethan realized the same. That life was richer, more meaningful, and more fulfilling when shared with someone who was willing to stand beside him, not just in ease, but in challenge as well. By the time the first snow of the season dusted the fields, Clara and Ethan had built a life together that neither had expected. They laughed more freely, worked more efficiently, and faced challenges with confidence because they had each other. The ranch was no longer just a place of work. It was a home filled with shared memories, mutual care, and the quiet joy of companionship. Clara knew she had found more than stability. She had found trust, respect, and the beginnings of genuine love. Ethan knew that he had found a partner who complemented his life, challenged him in meaningful ways, and shared his vision for the future. As they stood together on the porch one evening, watching the stars glimmer above the ranch, Clara and Ethan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Their journey had been long, full of challenges and learning, but it had led them to something lasting. They understood that life was not perfect, that struggles would continue, and that each day would bring new lessons. But together, they could face anything. They had built a partnership rooted in care, respect, and shared effort, a partnership that could endure and grow, bringing meaning and joy to both their lives. In that quiet, snow-covered evening, Clara and Ethan felt the culmination of months of growth and understanding. The fear of the unknown had been replaced by trust. Misunderstandings had been replaced by communication. Loneliness had been replaced by companionship. They had built a life together, not because it was easy, but because they had worked for it, learned from it, and chosen to be present for one another. And in that choice, they found the true meaning of partnership, the quiet strength of commitment, and the steady warmth of a shared life.